Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for our fall meeting of Superintendents Administrative Professionals. My name is Wilmarie Newton, and I will be moderating this call. In order to avoid background noise, I ask that you please mute yourself if you're not speaking. However, you can unmute yourself if you'd like to ask a question, or you can type it into the chat box. If you have a webcam, we welcome you to turn it on so we can make this more interactive. Please note this meeting is being recorded and will be archived on CABE's website under professional development. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Wilmarie. And just a reminder, if you can all mute yourselves, that would be great. And we'd love to see your smiling faces as well. So today we're getting together. I think this is about the 6th or 7th year that we've been doing these meetings. It seems like we just started them yesterday, but it's great to see so many names and some faces on our screen this afternoon. A quick note before we get started, I did drop a link in the chat box with the handouts for today's session. If for some reason you want me to email them to you after the session, that's fine, but you can just grab them now from the chat box and you should be good. We have a really ambitious agenda for today's meeting, I believe, and we do have a hard stop of 1:45 because our producer, Wilmarie Newton, and I have another meeting to go to in this virtual format of which she is producing as well. So a lot has gone on since we last met in the spring. Some good, some not so good. But I'd like to start the meeting off just sort of as a place to recognize what has been going on, some of the successes you've had, because I know that despite life being difficult, as it continues to be, that there are successes that we are all having. And I also know that there are some opportunities, shall we say, as well, that we can maybe help one another with. So with that, I'm going to open the floor for some sharing from all of you. And don't be shy. How about I start with a success? I'll get the ball rolling here. While certainly with many opportunities involved in it, we are really thrilled that we're able to host an in-person CABE CAPS convention next month. It will look very different than it has in the past. But that, I think, is a success given the last 19 months that we have traveled. There are many opportunities involved in that success, but I'm putting that on the table as a success. Come on, this is your time to brag or to ask for help. I'll give it another minute.
Hey, Lisa, it's Sally Brown.
Hey, Sally Brown, how are you?
How are you? Leanne's here and Robin's here with me. We're in our conference room.
Hello. I knew that room.
I don't see it on our agenda, but how's everybody doing with Board Book?
We are going to have a separate meeting about Board Book, Sally. I'm working with the folks at Board Book because not everybody in this meeting uses Board Book.
Gotcha.
Yeah, so I am working with Russell Roberts, for those of you who are using Board Book, to schedule something after the CABE CAPS convention. Okay. Where we can have some training where you all have an opportunity to ask questions of Russell and get maybe a better handle on your use of Board Book.
I mean, we're doing okay. We're limping along, and between Robin and I, we're doing okay. But there are things that have come up. Russell's been awesome, though. Anytime you email him, he gets right back to us. So I'm appreciative of that. So okay. I just wanted to find out how other people were doing with it.
Yeah. And certainly others weigh in, but I wanted to share that there will be a training session in the late fall.
Can I weigh in, Lisa?
I'm sorry, Bob.
Can I weigh in?
You may weigh in if you wish.
This one's pretty quiet. I think there are two big victories that school boards, central administration, superintendents, teachers have had. We had, despite all the talk about whether you have to mask or you don't have to mask, we had a very successful opening of schools across the state. It was not like the catastrophe people had been warning us about. Same thing, despite the difficulty with bus drivers on September 27th. Mostly that went along fine. And actually, there's a third victory compared to other states. Even though we've had some pretty contentious elections, for the most part, our members, your superintendents, teachers, have not had the kind of intimidation and harassment that has gone on in other states. So I think that's a testament to the civility of boards and central office administration and superintendents across the state. And we've been able to keep things at a reasonable temperature as opposed to what has happened in some other states. With that, I will be listening, not talking.
And Bob, if you talk again, if you could put your headset on
Sorry.
because you're very muffled.
Sorry, could people
That's
hear
okay.
me?
No, that's okay. I think we got
Okay.
what you said, though.
Will do.
Others? Okay, I'm not going to force the issue, but certainly if you do want to share something, we will have time a little bit later on as well. So with that, I am going to turn the program over to our first two presenters. You all know Patrice McCarthy, CABE's Deputy Director and General Counsel. And we have a new addition to our staff since we last met. We are so delighted to have Conrad Valsing with us, who is our staff attorney. And Conrad is a great resource for you all as well. And when we were preparing this meeting, you all were great, as you always are, in submitting topics that you wanted covered. And I think that Patrice and Conrad are going to cover a number of those legal issues that you asked about. So without further ado, I'm going to turn the program over to Patrice and Conrad.
It's all yours, Conrad.
Thanks. So I'll start. You guys have seen the agenda. We're going to do 5 topics for legally sort of stuff. We're going to start with COVID challenges and specifically the mask mandates and the vaccine mandates, and more specifically, the executive orders that sort of implemented them. It's intended to be an overview. So if you have specific nuanced questions, please follow up with me or consult the state DOE website or the Department of Public Health, the state website, because they have great resources. The DOE website has the Adapt, Advance, Achieve opening, which I think was 2020, but they're continually updating it. There's actually currently 14 addendums on the website that deal with all sorts of specific nuances to the masking and the vaccine stuff. And they are continually updated. Not all 14 amendments are, because some are no longer relevant, but they're pretty clear about which ones are being continually updated, and they have dates on the addendums. So we're going to highlight, or I'm going to highlight 2 executive orders, 13A and 13G, because those are the current ones and they're important regarding masking and vaccination. Just as a note, the timing and the effect of these executive orders can sometimes be a little confusing because there's the date they're originally issued, and then they're sort of reaffirmed or extended through subsequent executive orders. So just taking 13A, it was originally issued on August 5th, 2021. It was set to expire September 30th, but it was extended till February 5th, 2022. And that was done by Executive Order 14, which was issued on September 28th. So the dates get a little confusing, and sort of the overlap of the executive orders can be a little bit confusing too. But basically 13A is the one that affects it, but for Executive Order 14 sort of extended it. Also, it's a little bit difficult sometimes to keep track of where the actual requirements themselves come from, because they're not always in the executive orders themselves. Sometimes the executive order will sort of task a certain individual or agency with implementing or creating rules around the issue. So going back to 13A, Executive Order 13A, what it specifically did was it tasked our state Department of Public Health with its issuing the actual mask requirements. So 13A didn't actually impose the mask requirements. It tasked the Department of Public Health and the commissioner with creating those rules for the mask mandate. So importantly, it empowered the commissioner to issue rules and then also to modify the rules based on, quote, changing public health conditions. So we also still, or she still has the power to change those, the initial rules. So just as an overrule of what the current masking rules are, again, this is very high level. There's very sort of nuance. There's a lot of nuance that can be sort of seen into these rules, but basically masks are required in school buildings when children are present, the operative phrase, and this is regardless of vaccination status. Masks are not required while eating or drinking, and a person can ask for an exemption from mask wearing if it is contrary to their health or safety because of, quote, a medical condition, behavioral condition, or disability. But there must be written documentation for that, and there's also a specific list of what kind of professionals can issue that documentation. And that's in Executive Order 12, which is referenced in the commissioner's rule. So again, there's a lot of sort of interplay with these executive orders. And also just a little note on that documentation, it actually does not need to name or describe the underlying condition that the exemption is based on. So that's sort of high level stuff on the masks. So now the vaccination, the most relevant executive order right now is 13G. It was issued September 10th, 2021. It was set to expire, just like 13A, on September 30th, but it was again extended to February 22nd by the same Executive Order 14. So 13G outlines the vaccination requirements for public school staff specifically, which is important for our purposes today. The requirement is separated into two categories. Staff hired before September 27th of this year and staff hired after 27th of this year, September 27th, excuse me. So specifically, the staff hired before September 27th must be fully vaccinated or submit the weekly testing. So there is that option to submit the weekly testing. However, for staff hired after September 27th, they must be fully vaccinated, or if they are not, they must specifically have a medical or religious exemption for not being vaccinated. And if that is so proven, they must also still submit the weekly testing. So the important difference is that the staff hired before September 27th do not need to prove a medical or religious exemption in order to opt for weekly testing. That's sort of the main important difference. So I hope that sort of provided a good overview of these general requirements to masking and vaccine mandates. And again, please follow up with me with specific questions. And really excellent resources, that State Department of Education website and the public health website. Those addendums are really helpful. They get into a lot of sort of frequently asked questions about specific scenarios a teacher or a staff member may be in. So those are great resources. But again, always reach out to me. And if I don't have a specific answer, I'm going to point you in the right direction. And I'm happy to be contacted any and all times about this.
So Conrad, let me ask you a question. The state requirements talk about masking when students are in the building. And I know that on many of the weekly Tuesday morning calls with DPH and SDE, there have been questions about that, especially over the summer months. Many of our administrative professionals actually work in school buildings. And the guidance then seemed to be, well, if you're pretty sure no students are going to be around, you as staff working in the building don't have to be masked. But could, for example, if a Board of Education is conducting their board meetings in a school building, could they have the additional requirement that for their meetings, everyone will wear a mask, even though that's not part of the state mandate?
I would say, yeah, this is sort of a floor for the requirements. Boards of ed can go above and beyond what they require for their own operations, especially if students aren't present. That would sort of be in their wheelhouse then to come up with rules like that.
Great, thanks. Any questions on this, on the mask vaccination piece? You're good. You've got it down. All right.
Okay, so next topic is me as well. This one is going to be a little in depth. I'm going to try to go through it fairly quickly though, because the PowerPoints that that Will Marie is going to bring up are going to be available for you. I think Lisa's prepared or already has sent out a flip book with these PowerPoints, and they're meant to sort of be detailed in a way that you can reference them in the future. So I'm going to go through the slides fairly quickly. Again, happy to answer questions today or later about it. But again, this is going to be pretty detailed to help you with virtual meetings and the requirements of virtual meetings. Okay. Okay, great.
Mr. Wilson, what's up, man? Great job the other day.
Okay, so I'm just going to start. So,
All right,
We'll
so,
circle back to that.
yeah,
then.
yeah. no,
But do you think you need more than
Just a
2 minutes?
reminder that if you have your phone on,
Thank you, Jen.
You're welcome. I'll be in here for a little bit.
Folks, if you could please take a moment to either mute the microphone on your computer, or if you're calling in on your cell phone, to please mute your cell phone. We're getting some background conversations. Thank you.
So we're just going to get the PowerPoint settled, and then I'll start talking. Yeah, the second page is good. Okay, so today I'm going to be talking about both regular and special Board of Ed meetings, public meetings. So they can be held virtually, either fully virtual or partially virtual until this date is important, April 30th, 2022. And the source of this end date was from the June legislative session this year, Public Act number 21-2. It went into effect July 1st of this year, but section 149 is the operative section if you want to reference it personally, where a lot of this information is getting pulled from. That sort of set down these mandates for these virtual meetings. Now, it's important to note that it's not mandated that board meetings have to be conducted in this way. It's just that they are allowable options, again, until that end date, April 30th, 2022. And again, something can be imposed in between now and then where they extend this, but for now it's April 30th, 2022. Next slide, Wilmer. So I thought something that may be useful in talking about this is that I'm going to separate talking about these requirements and sort of what we have to do before a public meeting, what we have to do during a public meeting, and what we have to do after a public meeting. Next slide, please. And this is just a title slide. So the first thing we're going to talk about here is we're going to talk about before the virtual regular meeting. So this is going to be for the next few minutes, just talking about regular meetings. Next slide, please. So when a regular meeting will be fully or partially virtual, you'll notice that some of these things will be specific to fully virtual meetings. There's kind of a little bit more strict mandate around that because it's limited in terms of, the public forum in person. So you'll notice that a lot of these are either going to be for either fully or virtual, or the second group being fully virtual. So this mandate right here is regardless of whether it's fully or partially virtual. And this is about notice of the meeting and notice of the agenda of the meeting. So at least 48 hours before the meeting, notice of the meeting has to be sent directly to the members of the agency, the Board of Ed. And that can be done either in writing or electronically, so email. And notice that the meeting will be held virtually must be posted in these 3 places. You'll see this a few times in the presentation. In the superintendent's office or with the town clerk, on the district's website, if there is one, and for regional boards in the town clerk's office of each town. And of course, you can settle that also by doing the superintendent's office of each, although it probably would just be one superintendent. So the town clerk's office for each town is probably the advisable bet there. So just a little note, the requirement to post the notice of a regular virtual meeting on the agency's website is not actually required for non-virtual meetings under the Freedom of Information Act. But again, it's just a good practice to do so, even if you're not doing a virtual meeting. Next slide, please. So here we have the agenda. At least 24 hours before the meeting, the agenda for, again, either fully or partially virtual, must be posted in the same 3 locations as the previous slide. And the notice of the meeting and the agenda should also, that should actually, it's more of a mandate. It has to include instructions on how to access the virtual meeting. And if we're allowing, or you're allowing participation in comments virtually, there has to be instructions on how to do so. Next slide, please. Now, again, here we have a little more strict requirements for fully virtual meetings. If a member of the public requests this is not something you have to proactively do, but if a member of the public requests this, the agency must provide them with a physical location and any necessary electronic equipment to attend the meeting. There is some requirements on the member of the public. They have to do this in writing and provide it at least 24 hours in advance of the meeting. And again, you'll notice that this is a little more strict because it's fully virtual. And if the request is made, they also still have to be able to comment and participate however they comment and participate in in-person meetings. So whatever your Board of Ed, implements for comment has to also be provided for this virtual forum. But one little caveat is that if this equipment fails while this person is participating or offering comment, you don't have to adjourn the meeting or postpone. Next slide, please. So here we have requirements for the actual virtual regular meeting itself, like the actual conduct of the meeting. Next slide, please. So fully virtual meetings, again, more strict because it's fully virtual. It must be recorded or transcribed except for any executive sessions. And if a quorum of the board participates in a fully virtual meeting from the same physical location, that location actually also has to be made available for the public to attend as well. Next slide, please. So if the electronic equipment used to conduct the meeting fails, or if a specific board member's equipment fails, and that person is necessary for the quorum, this is a little bit of an odd little requirement, but you have to wait at least 30 minutes to resume the meeting, but you can't wait longer than 2 hours to resume the meeting. And there are also nuances to this resumption requirement. So next slide, please. So the resumption can be done in person or virtually. However, the quorum has to be present if it's going to be fully or partially virtual. And if the meeting is resumed or will be resumed, I'm going to stop in the middle of this sentence because I don't know how practicable this one is, but it specifically says if practicable, so it's not really much of a mandate. But basically, if you have this adjournment because of electronic issues, the Public Act sort of suggests that you should post on the website an approximate time of resumption. But again, you only have that 30-minute to 2-hour window. I can't imagine a scenario unless you guys are really, virtually tuned in and updating websites in the middle of board meetings. I don't see how this one's ever going to be practical, but it is there. If somebody wants to update a website in real time about when it's going to resume, maybe that's common practice. I don't know. And of course, if the meeting is resumed, the public access should be resumed if possible. Again, it's not a mandate, but again, it's just if this is at least a lot more practicable, I think, than doing the previous one, but restore the public's access as best you can. And again, at the outset of the meeting, again, not a mandate, but the board can announce procedures that will be followed if the electronic equipment should fail. Next slide, please. So if the electronic equipment of a member of the public should fail and the person loses the ability to participate in a fully virtual meeting, the meeting need not be adjourned or postponed. And specifically, if a board member's electronic equipment should fail during a fully virtual meeting, You only need to adjourn or postpone if that person's presence is necessary for a quorum. Next slide, please. So this is, again, I don't want to call it a mandate, but there's a legal standard here where you have to make a good faith effort in these virtual meetings to identify yourself being the board member and also a member of the public. But really hit this home for the board members themselves, that every time they introduce themselves, I would say especially for a fully virtual meeting, identify themselves by name and title, even if it's just a matter of member of the board. And a very important mandate based on the voting during these meetings. So when a virtual meeting occurs, either fully or partially, if a board member is participating virtually, all votes at said meeting must be taken via roll call, unless the vote is unanimous, of course. And the minutes of the meeting must detail which board members attended virtually and which board members attended in person. Next slide, please. And again, this is a little carve out for if you're experiencing some disruption of members of the public, and you can't restore the order, or the board member or the board chair can't restore order. They can be, there is an allowance to electronically move them from the meeting if they can't return to composure. And there also is sort of the requirement that if they do return to composure, you should let them back in, but it's also okay to remove them electronically if they're, proving to be especially contentious. Next slide. Okay, so now this is going to be requirements for after the virtual regular meeting. A lot of it has to do with sort of posting the minutes. Next slide. So within 7 days after the meeting, the recording or the transcription must be posted on the district's website and, as usual, made available in the district's office for public access. And this recording or transcription must be made available for at least 45 days. Again, for fully virtual meetings, the recording or transcription is mandated. For semi-virtual or hybrid, partially virtual, whatever you want to call it, it's just sort of a good practice. So identical to non-virtual meetings, this is the same whether it's virtual or just fully in person. The minutes of a fully virtual and partially virtual meeting must be made available, again, within the same 7 days after the meeting for public inspection in the district's office or in the office of the superintendent. Again, that's nothing new. And any votes taken by board members must be written down and made available to the public within 48 hours and noted in the minutes. So you see there's a little bit of a gap between when these votes have to be made available and when the minutes have to be made available. And again, just made available, not posted. Next slide, please. So now we're going to go on to virtual special meetings, the meetings that aren't posted in those January schedules for the year. And we're going to do the same breakdown. We're going to talk about before the special meetings, during the special meetings, and after the special meetings. So next slide, please. So this is, again, slightly different from the fully, or not fully, but from the regular virtual meetings. The notice of the special meeting and the agenda of the special meeting must be posted at least 24 hours now before the special meeting on the district's website if available, but I'm pretty sure almost everybody has one, and in the superintendent's office or with the town clerk. And again, same thing for the regular meetings, but the notice in the agenda must state whether the special meeting will be fully or partially virtual and include instructions for members of the public to attend, and if participation is allowed, as most do, the same rights of participation. Next slide, please. So here we are now with during the special meetings. Next slide. So same thing for the regular meetings. The minutes have to mention who attended in person and who attended virtually, board members. And the same requirement here, where if the electronic equipment fails, or if the board member's equipment fails and that person's needed for a quorum, the same requirements apply. And the reference is slides 10 and 11. We're not going to go back now, but that's more for future reference. Next slide, please. Same sort of advice here. Well, it's not advice, it's mandated, but the legal standard is not so much a mandate as it is, you have to make a good faith effort, but the people speaking should identify themselves and title. And the same requirements for voting. The voting needs to be roll call. If anybody is participating virtually, any board member, again, unless the vote is unanimous. And the meetings the minutes rather have to note who attended virtually and who attended in person. Next slide, please. Again, this is the same as the virtual regular meetings. You still have the ability to remove electronically anybody who is being unnecessarily contentious. But you do have to allow them an opportunity to reinsert themselves if they do regain composure. Next slide, please. Again, so this is going to be talking about mostly with the posting of minutes after the meeting. Next slide. So within the 7 days, the fully virtual or partially virtual special meeting, the minutes must be made available in the district's office or in the office of the superintendent. And the same thing, that the votes have to be noted within 48 hours after the meeting, and the votes need to be available for public inspection within 48 hours. So although you have a little bit more time to post the minutes, this vote recording has to be done a little earlier. Next slide, please. So what I thought would be helpful talking about all this stuff is to offer some charts for virtual versus in person for both regular and special meetings. This is going to be more overview. You should consult the earlier slides for a little more nuance in this stuff, or again, reach out to me. I'm always happy to answer questions. Next slide, please. But here we have a nice breakdown of the chart, of a chart for regular meetings in person versus virtual, and it shows you the difference. A really quick reference in terms of timing. This is really important for timing sort of stuff if you want to look up timing. Nuance again will be found earlier in the slides, but this is a really good overview for regular meetings. And then the next slide is going to be, next slide please, is special meetings, the timing differences for special meetings. Again, these will be hopefully useful references, and I'm always happy to explain more if you have specific questions. Next slide. So I just want to sort of end with a few notes about some things that may be helpful in working through this stuff. So two terms that are used a lot in the Freedom of Information Act and this public act is public agency and agency. And what we're really talking about here is the Board of Education and the school district. And there's also a really common phrase, the political subdivision of the state. And that's used a lot in the FOIA and the Public Act. But really all they're talking about here is local government. It's just a phrase that's a synonym for local government. The city, town, municipality, et cetera. Also, really important note, when you're calculating these timing requirements for regular or special meetings, you're going to exclude, the common things to exclude: weekends, legal holidays, and days on which the district or superintendent's office is closed. This is more just a note. This is beyond virtual meetings. This is just something to keep in mind that I think is always kind of interesting and also important. But the superintendent's office is actually technically considered its own public agency. It's a single member public agency under the FOIA. But there's explicit carve outs for superintendent staff or administrative meetings that aren't sort of governed by these public meeting requirements. But you have to be a little bit careful, because if outside parties participate, or if, quote, a hearing or other proceeding is conducted, then you may have inadvertently created a public meeting, and then you can, run afoul of some of those FOIA requirements. Next slide, please. And this is just some of the sourcing for what I talked about today. If you want to consult it personally, or just, to see where this information is coming from, that first citation is from the June special session this year that was enacted or got force in July 1st of 2021. The FOIA Commission came out with a summary of the Public Act to sort of put it in a little bit easier to understand terms. And then you'll notice, if you actually ever care to go to the Public Act, they reference the Freedom of Information Act itself quite frequently, whether they're saying this is a modification or, do these requirements that are also in the requirements for regular meetings. And again, always feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to answer questions, no matter how simple or complicated. And if I don't know the answer, I'm going to try really hard to find the answer. So again, I'm happy to be a resource, and I am, happy to answer any questions.
Thanks so much, Conrad. That I think that chart is really helpful. I know it's helpful to me.
You have to suffer the beginning to get to the chart.
You can really get sort of lost in the weeds of some of these current requirements. I see that Krista has her hand up, so if we can.
Oh, yes, can you hear me? Thank you so much for that information. I think it was really helpful. I just had a very quick question regarding providing instructions for the
Whoops, we lost your audio, Krista.
Krista, maybe if you type your question into the chat box, if you're able to do that, we can get you an answer from Conrad or Patrice. Oh, there you are now.
Oh, you can hear me. I'm sorry. I just wanted to know, as far as going back to having the public comment on the posted, the instructions, how do you have that on the agenda on the website as far as commenting during the public meeting, instructions for that?
I would say wherever it's most useful. I mean, putting it on the agenda would be helpful, but also I've seen on some district websites, they'll say when the upcoming meeting is and whether it's virtual or partially virtual. In my opinion, I think it would be great to maybe put like a little mini paragraph under that just to sort of explain the process for public instructions, commenting. But again, either would satisfy sort of the notice requirement of letting the public know that, they can comment publicly and also the process for commenting publicly.
Great. Thank you very much.
Krista and Sally. Krista, I can send you how we do it here in Windsor. It's I copy what the town council does and it's worked out really well. So I'll send that to you after the meeting.
Terrific, and maybe send it to Lisa and she can post it on your listserv perhaps, or somehow. I'll leave the distribution to Lisa.
Okay.
We have a question as to how long you need to keep minutes in the superintendent's office, since the town also has a copy. That would fall under state records retention, and I don't have the answer off the top of my head to that. But I will look that up and we'll also get that posted to you.
Again, I have been told for forever.
Yeah, I think the answer is forever,
You
but I
can't
was
go wrong with forever.
But I was afraid someone might try to throw something at me if I said that. It might break your screen or my screen.
I keep all my original minutes in our safe. They go back to the start of time.
I am pretty sure that is the answer. And I know some of you contact us at the beginning of the summer because you were trying to clean out files, and I had to give some of you bad news about files that you couldn't clean out. But we'll confirm that for you. On a similar note, our materials for meetings required to be kept. Agendas, backup material for agendas. Again, that's governed by state records retention, and we're going to look up the specifics of that. And I might actually be able to look that up while Vin is speaking in a few minutes.
Cheryl, you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute?
She may have already asked.
Hi there, thank you. One question, when the public is giving comment, we had one occasion where the person wanted to provide like a presentation, even if it was just 2 or 3 slides, and they were denied because, they might be showing something with a, confidentiality breach or inappropriate. So am I correct that when we are doing things virtually and a member of the public wants to comment, that they can't bring in video props or, I would think that you just, that we're taking the right stance by denying them access to any video props?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I'd be careful of is deny it to everybody. Don't
Right.
deny it just to people who you think may do something strange. If you deny it for one person, you kind of have to deny it for everybody.
Okay.
But there's nothing in FOIA that would mandate allowing such a thing to be done. And that just comes down to sort of board discretion and board policy. I don't know if you have anything.
No, I would agree. It's public comment. It's not you're not required. And actually, under the Freedom of Information law, in Connecticut, there is no requirement that a board allow public participation. Now, every board does, and we absolutely think that you should, but that means that the parameters around public participation are determined by the board.
Thank you.
Question about having the votes available within 48 hours. Do the votes need to be posted on the website or just have them available if someone contacts their office?
So the latter thing, you don't have to post them, but just have them available if there is a request. And again, in the minutes, it'll usually know, especially if there's roll call or unanimous, the voting is recorded in the minutes. And it's one of the few things that actually is mandated by FOIA in the minutes is the voting records. But because the FOIA is actually pretty hands off with what has to be in minutes, except for voting. It's pretty specific about that. But again, just having those as a reference somewhere in your office within 48 hours is important. But they don't have to be posted as far as I know.
All right. Any other hands raised? I think we're good. And we'll certainly be able to probably have time for a few more questions at the end. I'm going to talk a little about maintaining safety and civility at your board meetings. How many of you have experienced unusual disruptive activity by members of the public during a board meeting? I see at least one hand up. Yeah, okay. Have any of your boards felt the need to call the police to provide support, either to maintain order during the board meeting or to support board members and staff as they leave the meeting and go to their cars, for example? Okay, a couple of hands raised. This is a situation that I would say is unprecedented in the over 30 years that I've been doing this work. We certainly had the well-publicized episode of the Governor's Education Roundtable in Cheshire, where a group of individuals who were opposed to mask mandates for students in schools disrupted that roundtable. As the governor went to his car, were literally in his face, yelling obscenities. They had small children with them. It's the only time I've ever actually seen the governor's security detail. He does have state troopers that travel with him. And it's the only time I ever actually have seen them sort of swoop around him and move him towards his vehicle. So it is unprecedented. Clearly, one challenge for board chairs, and many of you will have turnover in board leadership after the election, so you'll have perhaps people that have never chaired a board meeting before, is the challenge of maintaining civility during a board meeting. Civility among the members of the board, as well as civility in terms of the members of the public that are participating. We did do a webinar about a month ago, and it is archived on our website, about conducting a board meeting in these very divisive times. And I know we'll do something when we do our new board member leadership conference in December on a similar topic. But if you have a board chair, particularly a newly elected board chair that's struggling with this, please feel free to have them reach out really to any members of the CABE senior staff, and we can try and support them, maybe connect them with a mentor an experienced board chair who has been through something similar, although none of us have really been through what we're going through right now. But there certainly have been contentious board meetings in the past. Usually those were spaced apart a little more than they seem to be these days. One thing that has proven to be very helpful is if the board chair reads a statement at the beginning of the board meeting, and we have several boards represented here who have historically done this and have been kind enough to share that opening statement. Bloomfield, Windsor, and New Canaan. And I think Lisa has that posted in your handouts. But those statements set the tone for the board meeting. They address the issue of civility. They remind the board and the public what the purpose of public participation is, which is not to engage in a dialogue. And that's what can sometimes make a challenging situation even more divisive. So we highly recommend that if your board chair is not currently doing this, they think about beginning the meeting in this way. And it's just a very calming statement, I would say. It's not targeted at any particular conduct. It's just to remind everyone why they're there, which is for the students of the district. In addition, one of the issues that came out of this webinar that we did was a recommendation that districts be in touch with their local police, and have a discussion, the board chair, perhaps the superintendent and the local police chief, about what level of security is required on a regular basis. Some boards have opted to have a plainclothes police officer attend their meetings. We were at the State Board of Ed meeting in early September, which was immediately following the episode with the governor and the Commissioner of Education in Cheshire. There were state troopers at that meeting, which was the first time that we had ever seen their presence there. The October meeting, they simply had a security officer stop by the meeting. There was no disruptive activity going on, and he went on his rounds. But having that discussion in terms of how local police would respond if they get a call from a board chair. We were talking to a board chair in the last couple of weeks who said, I know that I would recess the if things started to feel unsafe, I would recess the meeting and make a call to our local chief of police. And we've already had a conversation about if I call, that means we really do need a response. So with that, I see in the comments they've had police present but not needed. Great, glad they were not needed. Sometimes the presence, every community has to deal with this individually. There are clearly communities and boards of education that feel that a police presence could escalate a situation. And there are others that feel that a presence, outside the board meeting, at the board meeting door, can be helpful. And Lisa tells us that the statements are in your handouts link. So with that, and any comments you want to share, any strategies around the issue of safety and civility at board meetings? All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Conrad then to talk about that. But now we've got two categories of statewide issues that we know you've all been impacted by in one way or another. So bus drivers.
So the bus driver shortages, I should just start by saying that this has been a problem for longer than this year, and it seems that it's going to continue to be a problem. So newspapers, local and state newspapers, as well as school officials and transportation leaders, they've sort of been sounding an alarm for this shortage prior to this school year, but it became really urgent in August and September of this year. It's not just a local issue. It's not even just a Connecticut issue. It's honestly a nationwide issue. Even just a cursory Google search, will bring up the craziest stories of who's filling in for bus drivers in different states. And everybody's experiencing shortages. It's a long-standing problem, but I think it is fair to say that it has been exacerbated by COVID. And in Connecticut specifically, sort of the source of that urgency in August and September, some of it was because of the vaccine mandate for school staff, which was going to kick in and did kick in September 27th. And the school staff also included the drivers, the school bus drivers. Just sort of as an overview or just a conclusion at the beginning here, it doesn't seem like any great catastrophe happened with the vaccine mandate. There was fear that there would be sort of mass walkouts, mass strikes, mass quittings, people just leaving their job rather than being vaccinated. But a lot of sort of news sources have reported that it's just sort of the regular shortages from before the vaccine mandate. There hasn't been some great catastrophe as of today, of course. So in Norwich, they were talking about all over Eastern Connecticut. The bulletin said that there was no mass walkout as they were sort of reporting earlier the week leading up to September 27th. And also the state DOE reported in the afternoon of September 27th, they said they actually only had 2 formal requests for drivers for a total of 4 drivers. And those were from the districts of Derby and North Haven. Again, that's not to say there's not a shortage. There is, and there's definitely a shortage, but it seems that what's happening is that districts are dealing personally with their private bus companies and coordinating certain mitigating things, whether it's doubling up routes or coordinating routes in a specific way. For example, in New Haven, they have about 18,000 students and only about 5% have been affected by the bus driver shortage as of September 29th. And the commissioner of New Haven even came out and said that the bus service is actually improving incrementally. And that was 2 days after the vaccine mandate went into effect. So there's just some sort of general takeaways I think we should all just keep in mind. There is a bus driver shortage, but it's a long-standing problem. It has been exacerbated by COVID, but there hasn't been some great increased catastrophe due to the vaccine mandate. And districts are sort of the last takeaway I would offer is that districts are attempting to resolve this problem and mitigating it by just coordinating and dealing directly with the bus companies themselves. And that's sort of where that issue is right now. It's something I'm probably going to keep checking in on weekly for the foreseeable future, just see if any catastrophe does happen. But as of right now, we're just running on, I would say, the usual shortage and nothing really incredible yet.
And I see in the chat that Jennifer, her district has not only experienced a bus driver shortage, but bless your heart, Jennifer, that you've been filling in for cafeteria employees. We all have that line in our job description that says other duties.
As needed.
So we have jokingly polled the Cape staff to see if anyone was interested in driving a bus. We have not yet asked if anyone's interested in being a cafeteria worker, but that really is going above and beyond, I would say. Do you want to unmute and comment on that?
So Region 15, we are experiencing shortages for cafeteria workers. We've had ads in, the paper, our website, Indeed, everywhere, and there is no one. And the people that came in last week, they couldn't be hired because they're not vaccinated and they have no intention of being vaccinated. So we don't have any, we have no one. So we've been, I've worked a few times at one of the elementary schools, serving lunch and prepping the breakfast is a huge, I want to say issue, but like everyone gets it. So you have to prep for it, afternoon before. If someone's out sick or calls in sick, there's nobody. So our cafeteria, our director of, food services, she's busy. She's working the register. She's working, not only she's in all the kitchens. We have 7 schools. So, and her secretary is in a kitchen almost every day. So
yeah, and it's not a problem that unfortunately that's limited to our schools, because we see restaurants,
right.
fast food establishments, all experiencing a worker shortage.
Right. Well, the schools, we know if you can't serve lunch, you can't open the school. So it's a challenge. That's all.
Any other comments? Okay, so Terry says that Monroe has their public participation policy written out on each agenda and a link on the agenda for anyone wishing to speak to sign up. Also, the option for the public to write in and have it read by the board chair at the board meeting. And the board chair asks the public at each meeting to please keep in mind that each person, whether in person or written to the board, can only have a maximum of 3 minutes. We have had members of the public that have asked that their 10-page statement be attached to the Board of Education minutes. There is no requirement that that be done. Again, it's their opportunity is to provide 3 minutes of communication, and it is limited to that. And that's that. Well, whatever your board policy is. Some of you say 2 minutes, some of you say 3 minutes, but it is uniform whether they are participating in person or submitting something in writing. Some boards by policy say that the written comments will not be read into the record, so to speak, but will simply be distributed to the Board of Education members as communications. Bob, you have your camera on. Does that mean you want to ask a question? We're hoping not.
No. No.
Good to see you anyway.
But thanks.
The question is, if the letter is linked on the agenda, does it need to be in the minutes too? It could just be listed under correspondence from citizen X, I would say. That, I mean, you don't, but there's no requirement that boards include all written communications in their minutes. Again, go back to what Conrad said, whatever you do, do it uniformly. If you have a practice of, for some reason, attaching commendations from the public in your minutes, then you would really have to include letters that are critical of the district, the masking policy, the transportation system, whatever it may be. So it's better not to start going down that road. All right, my final job is to talk about HVAC systems. And I know that many of the districts did take the opportunity over the past several months to do upgrades because of COVID in terms of purification, but also upgrades in terms of temperature control, because we do seem to be having more days of school in session when temperatures are really not that conducive to teaching and learning. The federal funds under the ESSER funds can be used for HVAC upgrades. The problem is that with so many of our school buildings being very old, many of them constructed of cinder blocks, it's the amount of funds available under ESSER is minute for many districts compared to the cost of real upgrades to HVAC. You can't just retrofit a 50 or 100-year-old building with air conditioning for a very low cost. So that's the challenge districts are facing, right? It seems easy for people to say, well, you've got all of this ESSER money, which is supposed to be used to support learning gaps and to support acceleration and to support social emotional well-being, and also completely upgrade your HVAC systems. We have been working in conjunction with the Connecticut Conference of Municipalities, the superintendents, the school business officials, to draw attention to this issue because it really does need ongoing state support. Right now, the school construction funds cannot be used if it's exclusively an HVAC upgrade project. And that is posing a real challenge. There seems to be some feeling that you should, all municipalities should have been taking care of this on a routine basis. But when you look at the price tag for many districts, it's just not a routine budget item. It is a major school construction investment. So I'm going to leave it at that and see if you have questions or have experiences to share about the HVAC situation in your district. while you're thinking about that, in Madison, the board secretary states the procedure for public comment at the beginning of every meeting. She also has a yellow card indicating 30 seconds left and a red card indicating time is up. I think that's great. And I'm not even going to ask what happens after the person gets a red card issued to them, but. Other comments for the legal team? Am I good on wait time, Lisa?
No, you're
All right. We can
perfect.
turn it over, then we are going to turn it over to CABE's Senior Staff Associate for Policy Services, Vin Mastaro, who will talk about the policy adoption process. Vin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. And before I begin, I want to acknowledge my two colleagues with me today, Pam and Terry. Good to see you. I'm working from my home office today. Needless, I don't have to say that the primary function of boards is policies to guide the actions of those to whom it delegates the authority. And listening to previous presentations, I'm pleased to say, we do have sample policies available on the electronic meetings of boards, on civility, public comments, but I will acknowledge right up front, we have the easier part, that's putting the policy together. The more difficult part we recognize is the implementation at the local level. Policy, even in the best of times, is an arduous, time-consuming task. I've got to say that I've been doing this now for over a quarter of a century for CABE, and I've never seen a more prolific General Assembly session in which the number of policies that have been impacted. We're still playing catch up even at our own office in terms of getting the material out to you. And needless to say, some of the same problems you folks have faced, we're facing. The vaccine policy, I think we revised it 3 times within as many weeks. It's almost before the ink got dry. And certainly that creates a problem when your most adoption process, you have a first reading and a second reading, and they're usually at least 2 weeks to a month apart. So even the policy that you had at first reading is no longer there by the time you get the second reading. The adoption process itself is a fairly simple one. Usually it's the responsibility of the superintendent to keep the board informed in terms of what needs to be changed, what needs to be added, what needs to be rescinded. But we recognize there are a lot of issues that are impacting, especially during this pandemic. And we've heard frequently among the 3 of us in the policy department and the Zoom meetings that we've held with districts that they're facing a great deal of difficulty in just keeping up. And we know that, and we recognize that. Policies can be adopted, revised, or amended, or rescinded at any regular or special meeting of the board in which it has been appropriately placed on the agenda and the material sent out before the meeting takes place. It's also very common for the process to work through the board's policy committee. We know in some places the committee is named other than the policy committee, but that it functions as a policy committee. These committees, made up of a few board members and usually with an administrative liaison. It's been our experience that the policy committees with the greatest success are those that have administrative leadership. That leadership is either provided by the superintendent, or in a larger district, it can be with the assistant superintendent, or a director of operations, a director of personnel, whatever the administrative title may be. But that helps to keep the committee focused. because so much frankly hits the committee at any given point in time. Case in point, and many of you are subscribers to the policy update service, the first issue, or I should say the issue that went out at the end of July, there were over 20 policies that were impacted just by General Assembly actions. And we know that districts are working through those. Sorry to tell you, the next edition will have some more policies impacted by General Assembly action for the districts to consider. And we'll probably, I know we're going to have some in either the January or April edition, because there are a number of actions by the General Assembly that call for new policies, but we're sitting on it right now because the legislation said that it had to comply with guidance put forth by the State Department of Ed. So we're waiting for that guidance to come forth before we put any sample language together. The policy committee, as a rule, discusses this material and makes the decision in terms of when it's ready to go to the Board of Ed, and notifies the superintendent to, place that on the agenda. And the agenda would be for either, the adoption of new language or the modification of existing language, and not too frequently, even though we wish it were more, when existing policy should be rescinded. The process usually follows, so there's usually a first reading, but there is no statutory requirement that you have any given number of readings. It is most common, not only in Connecticut, but I've seen bylaws throughout the country, that there's usually a first reading and a second reading with a period of time determined by bylaw between those readings. The idea of a first reading is in order to provide some time for reaction by those impacted by the policy, by the board itself. When it's usually placed on an agenda for first reading, it's a great idea to also place that proposed modification or new policy on the district's website to solicit input from members of the community. In the case of an emergency, it is possible for a district not to go through its normal process, and therefore it can be action can be taken at the initial reading. That doesn't happen that often. Also, depending on the amount of amendment that takes place between a first and second reading, the board can determine, use its discretion if they feel an additional reading might be necessary in addition to the usual second reading. And that's at the discretion itself of the board. Amendments to the policy at first reading don't by themselves mean that there's going to be a need for more than the usual second reading. It depends on the degree to which the policy had been amended and other perhaps community issues that might come forth. If it's revised simply for a legal change, what we call a technical issue, over which really the board has no control, or the change is minor, the policy can be approved at one meeting. But again, that's at the discretion of the board if the board's bylaw is basically 2 or more readings. The process is usually spelled out for each of the districts in 4 specific bylaws. One is number 9311, which talks to the formulation, adoption, and amendment of policies. There's a similar bylaw for dealing with bylaws, number 9312. There's another one that talks to administrative regulations, that's 9313. And let me say here that usually regulations are not taken up for board action unless either the administration desires the approval of the board on a particular topic, or in statute, the statute calls for the adoption of a policy and procedures. And the term procedures is synonymous with administrative regulations, because those are the guidelines, that's the detail. There's a limited number of such administrative regulations where that's called for. That's pretty much the adoption process, other than once the board has formally made the adoption, that it's a good idea. Obviously, it has to be mentioned in the minutes, but if it's not mentioned in the minutes, then it's amazing how many times we've come across the policies of boards in which there's no adoption date listed. We interpret that to mean it's not listed in the minutes. And we can't just go ahead and put in a date for you. It has to be formally listed in the minutes, which then gives it the basically the authority of law. Without an adoption date, it's worthless. And that's why we would also recommend that to the minutes of the meeting in which the policy is adopted, the sample policy be affixed to the minutes, so that all the bases are appropriately covered. And other than that, some bad news, but I think you folks already know this. Policy work never ends. It's ongoing. And there's always new legislation. There's always new issues. Hopefully there's not going to be another pandemic. But yet I've heard the authorities say it's likely that in the future that'll again happen. The election will bring new board members on board. That will mean changing views on a number of issues. All of these will continue to impact the work of the committee, the board, you folks, and keeping it all moving. And we absolutely recognize it has gotten more difficult. We're here to provide whatever help that we can provide to you. Some thoughts to keep in mind. First, on the good side, there really, in the case of policy, there's no formal oversight process. There are I can probably count on one hand the number of policies that have been called in for formal review by state authorities. So you don't have a formal oversight process, but the board should create its own by either when it establishes an annual calendar of events for the year to determine either particular topics or series that they want to look at that particular year to help guide the committee or the policy review committee. The yearly calendar is important. We say, create a policy calendar as to when the committee should be, what the committee should be looking at, when it should be scheduled for first readings and the like. Other than that, stay patient, don't get discouraged, and we're ready to assist you with any questions that you may have.
And I would just remind folks to please mute yourself if you're not asking a question or sharing something. Thank you. Then there's a question, I don't know if it's directly posed to you, but I think maybe to our folks. Is anyone considering a policy to mandate vaccination of volunteers?
We haven't at this point considered one, but I don't have the vaccination policy in front of me. But my gut response is I think that there is language in that vaccination policy, since that there are people who are having fairly constant contact with the student body, they should be vaccinated. And I think that is covered in the present vaccination policy. for staff. Because you also have the obligation, and I see a parallel for contractors that are working with the district. They're not employees, direct employees of the district, but if a contractor's bus drivers, for example, have constant exposure to students, that they also come under the heading of required vaccinations.
Okay, and it looks like there's a follow-up to that saying volunteers are excluded, I believe specifically. So maybe as a named category in the policy.
I'm sorry, I lost you there.
So it's the follow-up comment is volunteers are excluded, I believe, specifically from policy to mandate vaccinations.
I'd have to research it.
Yeah. Is anyone considering a policy for vaccination of volunteers? Kimberly in Coventry typed in the chat that Coventry is not putting vaccination of volunteers in policy, but it is a safe and health protocol we are following.
I think it makes good sense because I'm beginning to see in some cases, in some states, where lawsuits have been posted regarding this people contracting COVID from the school setting. And I think the district might be more liable if they're allowing additional folks into the school without appropriate vaccinations or testing.
Okay, we've got a few districts chiming in that they are, Pat, I think it is, says we are, and Monroe and Bethany, same in those districts.
Because we've held, in the case of volunteers, we've seen a progression over time in which they're being held even before COVID, say in the non-health area, to the same background checks and so forth that other staff members have been held to. And pretty much it's been a tendency to hold into the same standards, whether it be background checks and the like. Also, I see that carrying over into the area of the COVID health emergency.
Okay, great. Any other questions for Vin? Let me just flip to second page. I don't see any hands raised. So with that, I will thank you, Vin, for your wonderful presentation. And I'm going to flip back to Patrice at the Cave Global headquarters for a moment. Just she has some information she was able to look up and to share with you all.
As to the questions on records retention, the requirement is that they be agendas be retained for 1 year. Minutes, as someone pointed out, do have to be permanent. They have to be maintained in the municipality. I would just check very carefully to make sure that your town clerk's office, for example, is maintaining the minutes before you destroy them at the superintendent's office. And interestingly enough, following up on Vin's presentation, policies and procedures also have to be maintained permanently. So while agendas you can destroy after a year, there may well be backup materials to agenda items that you have to retain on a permanent basis. That's it, Lisa.
Okay, back to me on the other side of the office building. Thanks, Patrice. So thank you, Patrice and Vin and Conrad, for your great presentations with a lot of information. We're going to segue into the last session of today's program, which is a little bit more interactive on your parts. So again, I invite you to turn on your cameras if you don't have your cameras on. It makes it a lot easier doing an interactive session when you can see faces instead of blocks with names. And I'm going to do this session We could do it in a much more in-depth. Oh, thank you for turning cameras on. I see more faces. Thank you. This could be done more in depth, but in the interest of time, I wanted to at least touch on it because I think that when we reflect on the last 19, 20 months, none of us ever thought we'd still be dealing with issues regarding COVID-19. And then add to that the social unrest that we all are, that this country is experiencing right now, with a whole number of issues, that takes its toll. And I know for one that I feel that the toll has been taken here on me, and I know it has on everybody. So what I'd like to do is just take a little bit of time with you to sort of recognize what COVID-19 has been for you. And I want you to look at this through the lens of you, not your family members who you care dearly about, not your friends who you care dearly about, but just you, your experiences with COVID. And hopefully by the time we're done with this piece in about 20 minutes or so, we'll all be a little bit better reframed, in a sense, looking at what life after COVID might be like. I know I'm not alone in dreaming about that day when masks can be dropped. You can more comfortably hug people upon greeting them. Those, all those many things. So I'm not going to ask anybody to share this because some of this is a little personal, but if you do feel compelled to share, please raise your hand. We definitely will have time for that. But I want you to think about what the last 19 months have been. And the first question I'm going to ask you is, what is your greatest loss, the greatest loss you've experienced during COVID-19? And I'm just going to give you a minute just to think about that. And I do promise that the questions get lighter as we move forward. So I would also now ask you, what's the greatest gain you've experienced during COVID-19? And I'll stop there for a minute and just see, is there anybody who wants to share their response to either question? And again, there's no pressure. And I'm just going to look for hands. Okay, I don't see any hands. Okay. So we've oh yes, Linda. No, who's speaking?
Linda.
Linda, okay.
Oh, sorry, I had to unmute myself.
There you go.
I think something that I have gained over this whole period of time is that with the Zoom calls, I've had a lot more interaction with older friends, friends that live far distances away, family members that live far distances away. Even something as silly as my siblings and I each do the New York Times mini crossword every morning now, and text each other every morning. And it's just like this check-in that we didn't have before, because I think we were all moving so fast and so wrapped up in our own worlds. I think the pandemic actually made a lot of us slow down.
Thank you for sharing that, Linda.
You're welcome.
And Terry, thank you for sharing in the chat box also. And I am so very, very sorry.
Lisa.
Okay, yeah.
Pat, did you want to share something? I saw your hand up.
I was just going to say, I assume I speak for a lot of us that my greatest loss was time with family. So I have adult sons who are married and a grandchild, and they're not local. So, it was maybe a year and a half before I saw them. And I missed that. And thank God for FaceTime, as we said. It was a game changer. And I think that goes back to what I think my greatest gain is the flexibility in how we look at what we do. and the fact that we can do things a little bit differently, and that sometimes it's better than the way we've been doing it before.
Absolutely. Anyone else? And I'm flipping back screen to screen to see if I see any hands waved or anybody waving like this at me or something like that. So I am trying to get everybody as I can. And I would agree with both of those. Being away from family was very, very difficult. But the greater use of technology has been really wonderful to connect with people like Linda talked about. My sister went back to work today in person for the first time in almost 20 months. And so we did a Zoom meeting as a family with her last night, just, cheering her on, because as we all know, you kind of lose your social skills a bit if you're, away from working with people in person. And she was quite nervous about that. So we had that opportunity to rally around her as a family and to cheer her on. So in the interest of time, as long as I'm not missing anybody who wants to share, I'm going to move along. And Terry also added, my gain was time at home, online and in person, working from home and slowing down life. Absolutely. Absolutely. So now I want to take a sort of another step in this process as we, oh, yes, I'm sorry.
Hi, Lisa. Before you move on, we have another comment.
I just wanted to say that I'm more thankful now and grateful for just being able to be around my family and see them and not take anything for granted. And I'm just really very thankful. So many people have lost someone, so I'm just grateful for that.
Great. Thank you, Gail. And Will-Marie, thank you for tipping me off. Okay, so getting a little deeper into this journey, we're kind of getting to this point in it, but my next question to you all would be, what are you learning about yourself during COVID-19? And then the follow-up to that, and then I'll stop a minute again, but the follow-up to that is, what would it look like if you applied what you've learned about yourself going forward? In other words, how might it impact your work? Or I would expand it even further to, how might it expand your life going forward? And certainly if anybody wants to share at this point, I welcome that.
So Lisa, Wendy from Madison, I had to step away momentarily for the prior question, but I will just share one of the biggest losses for us, I feel, in this district, in this office in particular. We're a very close-knit group, and we all are good friends with one another, and we really enjoyed eating lunch together in our very small kitchen. We have some great get-togethers for Halloween around here. Is a huge deal because we have a pre-K literally right next to us that does a little Halloween parade through our office, and we decorate and we dress up and we have great Christmas parties. And that was a big loss here. I think we all felt very isolated from one another. We had to keep our doors closed if we were in an office, and those that were in cubicles had to have plexiglass put up around their cubicle and doors put in, and that made us all, I think, feel really isolated. We can't wait to be able to, socialize as a group again.
Yeah, absolutely. I know there's a core group here at CABE that has lunch together every single day. And yeah, similar to yours. And many of us here at CABE have worked together close to 20 years. So very much a family type setting, very close. So I think a number of us here from CABE, and I'm sure from school districts as well, totally understand that loss, because that's very real. Thank you for sharing that, Wendy. In the comments, Terry also added that she adopted a puppy that has brought her a lot of joy. I think this is Terry DeMars from our staff who commented and said a pet is one of the greatest joys, unconditional love. And Terry goes on to say, my coworker says she lost her mind during the pandemic, which I guess is Pam. Yeah, and I found that losing the 10 pounds I gained being at home during COVID is much harder now that I'm older. Yeah, I think a lot of us can relate to that, unfortunately. So I will share just for a moment on the what I learned about myself. And I think many of us probably share this. It might not be what came to mind immediately for you, but for me, I'm a heck of a lot more resilient than I ever thought I was. Ever. You know, my journey with not so much the pandemic, but a difficult time in life started November before the pandemic started. And I won't get into that, but I'm a lot more resilient than I ever gave myself credit for, and a lot stronger than I ever gave myself credit for. So, and I think that the way in which we've all had to live in the last 20 minutes, I think that if I asked the question, if you felt that way, I think there'd be as many hands raised as there are folks involved in this meeting today. So I'm watching the time because of Madam Producer and I have another commitment at 1:45, but yet I want to get us to the place where I want us to get by the end of this. So if we think about what we've learned, we can create what's called a narrative compass. It's kind of like words that are going to target these intentions, your intentions and purpose to help you move forward. And it's like a good reminder for yourself. So an example might be loosen up and let go, because we've all had to do that, haven't we? We've all had to sort of just say, okay, it's going to be what it's going to be, and just let it go. I'm living that with planning the Cape Caps convention right now. Frankly, it's like loosen up, just let it go, and it's going to be. Or it might be something like focused and fearless. But for you just to think about it, a couple of words that might be something that can help keep you moving in that direction that you want to. And I'm a fan of alliteration. I think that, fearless and focused, it just, the alliteration helps those sorts of things punch. So think about that for a minute. What might your narrative compass be? And again, if you want to share, you're welcome to. And if you don't want to, that is absolutely fine as well.
Lisa?
Yes.
Terry has shared something in the comments.
Okay, thank you. This time is giving me time to evaluate my personal happiness and what I want to do in my life going forward. I'm now starting piano lessons. Good for you. Good for you. Anybody else? Cheryl?
Yes, I think one thing is how much now I value being part of a team. And that includes being part of the CABES team when you are there for us. But, I don't think they ever overuse the slogan, we're all in this together. Because whether that's with our family, with people in our office building, or the district as a whole, or townspeople that you meet, library and things, I really find the value and strength to being part of a team. And, so that's one of my goals, is to continue to operate that way.
Great. Thank you. There is strength in numbers. Okay. Great. So I'm going to leave you with a little homework, and it's going to be a few questions for you just to continue on the journey with yourself. They're not quite as introspective as the questions that we've just been thinking about, but I think that they lead us the next several steps to what is life for you after COVID going to look like, because we are going to get out of this place. It's not as dark as it was maybe last winter, but it's not as bright as we all would like it to be. And I think that we need to recognize that, but we also need to recognize that it is going to be bright again. It is going to be bright again. The sun is going to fully shine once again, as it just started to shine through my window just a little bit more just now. But here are the questions I will leave you with. They're framed in a professional sense, like looking at your work, but I would offer too that you can look at these through a more personal lens as well, depending where you are in your life and what you might want to address more. First question is, well, here's the prefacing it all. In your ideal world, we all dream, we all have an ideal in our mind of what our ideal world is. 3 years from now, at work or at home or within my family or whatever, what projects are you working on now? Terry's going to be playing concert piano for all of us. Perhaps I'll be at a book signing writing the great American novel. Probably not, but you never know. Who are you working with? Cheryl mentioned teamwork and its importance. What position do you hold? So that could be professionally, or, maybe some of you are at that point in your life where you're considering retirement or something like that. So are you still working in the school district? Have you moved to more of a retirement kind of mode? Are you sort of straddling the line between retirement and working? What is your position, if you will? And the last question to that is, what else is going on in your career or world that is contributing to your happiness and success? Because I think that something we've all learned through this, and somebody mentioned in the chat, reevaluating priorities and what makes you happy, what makes you successful. And I know many of us have thought about this sort of, maybe not in these terms that I have laid out for you this afternoon, but many of us have thought, what is the post-pandemic world going to look like for me? I hope that going through this exercise offers you a little bit of focus and helps you recognize that, yes, the sunshine will shine very fully once again upon all of us. And I would just add a couple of last notes, and then I will be quiet and we have time for questions for any of us who may have been involved sharing with you today. Make sure that your expectations for your post-pandemic life are realistic. Just keep them realistic, and think about your priorities, live your values. And I think that has come through in a number of the comments that people have shared during this conversation. Live your values, what's important. And I also would say, just be grateful. If, find it in your heart to be grateful about this awful situation, which has allowed us in many respects to reboot our lives, refocus on what's important. My hope is for all of us that with a little bit of thought, that whatever our new normal is even better than what our pre-pandemic normal was. So with that, I leave you with hopefully lots of sunshine, lots of hope for what all of our worlds will be post-pandemic. And I now open the floor if anybody has any questions for anybody who has presented today. We're happy to hopefully provide you some answers. And I see Cheryl's hand is up.
Yes, when there was the talk about archiving materials, and it was mentioned about policy. When we go through policies, and I have like old policy books or the packets that were given to the policy committee and the work that was done, I don't think I have to save any of that. I mean, it's just really the current policy is the only thing I need. So all the generations of policy work and additions from, 20 years ago, I can toss all that, right?
What I would say is any adopted policy should be retained permanently. Drafts that you've gone through, no, but if they were adopted, because I think the point of the requirement is that to know at any point in time what the actual policy of the board was. So even if that point in time was 1985, that's the policy. And I see Vin nodding his head in agreement. Do you want to chime in, Vin?
I totally agree. The thing that you need to maintain is that which was the most recently adopted, even if it was 20 years ago.
So the original policy adopted, say, in 1989, I saved that. And then if it was revised in 1999, I have that. And now the revision now is current, I have that. Is that what you're saying? It shows the development from adopted to revised to revised.
That's what I think you need to retain, because it does say all policies and procedures are a permanent record.
Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions? I'm looking at our various Hollywood squares to see if I see hands up. Krista, I see your hand up.
Yeah, I'm not sure if anyone can answer this, but my question is regarding homeschooling. We've had an increase of homeschoolers, and some of our participants are doing a tuition paid online program. Is that considered homeschooling?
If they have said that they are not, if they have said they are homeschooling, then what mechanism they use to provide homeschooling is up to them. They may use an online program. They may use a series of books that mom or dad works with. They may do a pod of similarly situated students, but it doesn't matter for your purposes what mechanism they're using.
Exactly.
And Vin agrees, which is always a good thing. That's always very
in an area there was very little state oversight.
Yeah, the parent was trying to tell me it was a private school, and that's where the conflict was coming in.
Yeah, I don't think that qualifies. We don't recognize virtual schools in Connecticut as private schools. That they do in some states. There are virtual charter schools, for example, in other states. But I would say that person is homeschooling.
Okay. Any other questions or comments before we wrap today? Okay, I'm going to flip one more time page here and flip back. Okay, seeing no others, I just want to share with you what a joy we all find working with you to be. When I ask a staff person to join us and present to this group, they're always very happy to do so because you all ask incredible questions and you're involved in the learning process, and we appreciate that. So watch your email for something coming in April. It's not going to be in your email anytime soon, trust me, but we will look to gather in the spring. And my sincerest hope is that we do gather together, that we have coffee, tea, water, cookies, and goodness knows what else, and that we can do so safely together and really enjoy that experience. So with that, I thank you all for being with us today. You've been great, and we look forward to being with you soon. Stay well, have a wonderful fall, happy Thanksgiving, happy holidays. You're my first people to say that too, and we'll connect with you soon. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care all.
Thank you.